Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for this panel discussion to talk about the 8 fantastic short films that we just watched that have all qualified as Oscar shorts for the 2021 Academy Awards. We're going to talk to the filmmakers individually about their films in the order that we just screened them, starting with Augustus. So let's sort of jump into it. Augustus is directed by USC alumnus John Alston. And John, I am just so blown away by the ambition of this film. Of course, it seems like there's really 2 components: the production that you had of the short, and then the documentary footage that you pulled to I guess, emphasize the ongoing struggles and how things often remain the same over time. Can you talk a little bit about the first part, sort of where, I guess, where this production started? Was it also connected at all to any of the work you were doing at USC, or I guess what sort of inspired the short versus working on something longer form?
Yeah, great question. I guess the first part of that connection would have been, the lead and writer, Ayinde Howell, whom I met working on a short film during my time at USC. And so I guess close to 2 years ago now, he approached me with a screenplay he had already begun working on, and it had some brilliant ideas in it. And, I immediately wanted to be a part of the short film. And we went through and broke it down and really honed it in for what it could be for the short period of time that you have in the short form, to really kind of tell as much of the story as we could. So, just kind of weaving that together structurally, we knew we kind of had something there, and then we just kind of kept it moving. But that would be the first tie to, USC.
Tell us a little bit about some of the, I guess, the authenticity of the story of Frederick Douglass. What was the challenge for you between representing, I guess, what research is available about his life versus dramatizing something for the sake of a short?
Yeah, that was difficult too, because we're playing with timelines in this film, right? So if you're gonna make a period piece, typically that's a certain type of medium, and if you're gonna make a contemporary piece, it's another type of medium. So you're talking about really dialect, right? And we didn't want it to feel so jarring that when we went to the past, we had actors trying to speak in a dialect that maybe they didn't really fully understand completely, if not. So you wanted it to be natural, but also represent the formal themes of the time when we go back into the period. So that was kind of something that was one of the more interesting things to think about when we're paralleling these timepieces in this film.
How, at what point did you decide to parallel those 2 parts of the film? Because a lot of the footage that we're presented with happened during the pandemic. Mm. So, but obviously the murder of Black Americans has been, is an eternal theme, and certainly there have been plenty that have happened in recent years that you can draw from as well. I'm curious if that was always supposed to be brought together, or if that was something that was really inspired by what happened over the summer.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was just recently discussing that, and from my perspective as Black men, the original story is always relevant, right? We're talking about, yes, 2020 happened, but even before that, I was doing work and research on the events of Ferguson and the rise of Black Lives Matter, which was reinvigorated after Michael Brown and started with Trayvon Martin. And what you saw in Ferguson was kind of the birth of what we saw throughout the world, and obviously, especially in the United States of America this past summer. And so when we got into production on this film, for us, we felt strongly about the themes of the story and their relevance on a current basis. We just wanted to take some of the events that people knew and make them more personalized to the story that we were telling the protagonist in his journey, right? So that it actually aided his journey towards becoming an abolitionist. And so that was kind of something that we really focused on. But then 2020 did come, and we kind of got to a point where we felt like buttoning it with the current events. You know, we're talking about Frederick Douglass. In the film, he says it's always the same during his time, pre-Civil War. And then we see statues of Frederick Douglass being torn down today, you know what I mean? In response to, I mean, just based on a speech they gave, you know, 150 years ago, you know what I mean? 170 years ago on the 4th of July. So we were like, look, I understand why sometimes you do see this in films now, because it really does cement the theme that we were setting up when you're dealing with this type of subject matter.
Tell us a little bit about some of the challenges in terms of things like production design for making a short that's also a period piece.
Oh my gosh. One of the biggest things is that our main cast and crew are Los Angeles based. And we shot that in mostly in Petersburg, Virginia, in the summer. And we only had like 3.5 days to shoot this 18-page screenplay that balanced, you know, the 2 different time periods. And I had never worked in period before. But one of the reasons why we chose to shoot in Virginia is because there are a lot of people on the ground who have this kind of experience. And Allende had once before worked as Frederick Douglass in Virginia. And then when we got out there, the locations are just gorgeous. And I think really, for me, you know, I want to give the actors and the crew like the most realistic experience they're going to get, authentic experience they're going to get, so that we can get the best performances. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges, because we had to also cast local actors from there, and then we had to fly other ones in, and then a lot of our crew came from New York, and so lodging this amount of people, it's a short film, you know, we're not made of, you know, tons of money, so it was very, very difficult. We had to get very creative, but mostly we saved costs by shrinking our shooting time and our shooting days, but that was difficult.
Yeah. I went to the Frederick Douglass Estate Museum in DC a couple of years ago, and I'm curious if you had to in any way be in touch with you know, any sort of like historical society that you know, upholds and preserves his legacy, if that applies to something like a short film, and whether or not that would have played into the way that the story was written.
I think, you know, what we actually really did was took a truncated period of time in Frederick Douglass' life. We did actually, there are very few liberties that we actually kind of took, aside from the dreams, right? We wanted to emphasize the relationship between he and Anna, whom, you know, was born free. She aided his escape from slavery, as a matter of fact. And, you know, even though oftentimes portrayed kind of in the background, we felt that there was a role for her to play in his life that was strong, much stronger than that, which is obviously, you know, verified by the fact, like I said, that she helped him escape. So these are some of the things, his children, Louis and Rosetta, you know, we thought that would be a great place to kind of anchor and this idea of him as a family man, which is true. And as you see, the biggest thing that he wants to do is just live a normal life, you know, provide for his family, but he can't, you know, and that's kind of the theme that resonates today. That it's always the same when you're dealing with white supremacy and racism, you know, and in any kind of injustice, as a matter of fact.
Well, thanks, John. I'll come back to you when we open things up for some wider questions, but I wanted to welcome up Hinele Moana and Joe Wilson, the writer, director, producers of KAPAEMAHU, and just start by, I guess, asking how the story, how the I guess how this piece of mythology has been personal in your own lives. What sort of inspired you to want to tell this story?
Joe?
Well, Hina, I'd be really honored if you helped launch the conversation. But, you know, first, just to say it's a wonderful collaboration and we bring different elements to the story. Dean Hamer and I, as documentary filmmakers, who initially made a film about Hina here in Hawaii, and that's how we came to learn the story, through Hina's eyes. But Hina, why don't you introduce the concept initially?
So KAPAEMAHU was an understanding that I had shared with my colleagues, Dean and Joe, and it came about when we were doing the filming of the Kumuhina film that they wanted me to feature in. And the story about KAPAEMAHU was to give some background and some history to the understanding of Mahu, which is a very inclusive term here in my islands. And to my people, we understand LGBTI in this way. So that was just, it was sort of a random bit of information that came out, but I could not know just how relevant it would be, not only to um, come forward during this time of COVID-19, but also to me in my personal life, have it be a mirror reflection of what I was going to experience. And uh, several months ago, um, my partner passed away, and his role to me was the role that the healers represented in the film. So since you asked the question, that's my really honest answer. And the amazing parallels, the amazing things that I've seen and done, I watched unfold in our work. So it was a very spiritual journey for me. This film would probably be um, one of the pinnacles of projects that I shall work on because of it.
I I immediately went to look at I guess the location of the sacred spot in Waikiki Beach, and it is really sort of in the middle of a promenade with just sort of a bit of fencing around it. And I'm curious to know how awareness is being raised about these stones, about the story, about the power of the stones. What do you perceive as being the sort of awareness of them in contemporary culture?
Hmm.
I think that the awareness is critical because it serves the larger purpose of why we endeavored to do this film. So many elements of history, of language, and culture here in Hawaii are often suppressed or ignored. And when my community, the Hawaiian community, Kanaka as we say, when we Kanaka raise our voices about things that are important to us, we are often either devalued or set aside. And it's a constant uphill battle to continue to justify the things that we claim as rightfully ours and our decision to make. So, by bringing this film forward, we hope to encourage other filmmakers to do the same when they might be in that situation. Um, to control the narrative and to say to others that these are the things that are important to us. I truly hope that Kapaimahu, the site itself, is elevated to a place of honor just by the fact that we know it's there. We know its significance. Not that I'm encouraging people to go and leave an abundance of whatever people think that they should be leaving, but just to know that this is a place of respect and honor, and that it's not unlike anything in American history that American people will look at and be like, oh, this is the site of this struggle. This is where this battle took place. This is this significant hall or structure. Um, Things happen here in Hawaii that tend to bulldoze and take away our traditional structures and things that pertain to us. So I hope that Kapaemahu will be living on for yet another, whole nother generations.
Could you tell us a little bit about how they were rediscovered? Because the story of it being buried underneath a bowling alley is, of course, quite tragic. But then the fact that they've been brought back is a triumph. So what exactly happened there?
Well, maybe I could jump in here and just pick up on what Hina was saying. And it really relates to, I think, what John was talking about regarding his film, this idea that there is now a really important reckoning happening across the US and around the world in terms of what kinds of things are held up to celebrate people in history. And as Hina was saying, here in Hawaii, that monument on Waikiki that was put there by the Hawaiian people to honor people who are important in Hawaiian history has been erased. And so this project is really to help revive that history through the perspective of Hawaiian history and allow people to see who and how people should be honored for the contributions they've made. I think what's really important for us going forward is to help ensure that stories like this have the chance to be seen and heard in the way the cultures and the peoples, originally tell them. That's what's most important for us.
This story could have been presented either as a documentary or as a scripted dramatic, but you chose animation, and I'm very curious to hear about the discussions you had about why specifically animation and how you developed the style of animation that you chose.
Yeah, maybe I'm also sorry, I just forgot to answer the question you asked about how the stones were rediscovered. And so as it's been said, the stones were kind of present here for centuries on Waikiki Beach, and they were actually revered by Hawaiian nobility. Princess Like and her daughter, Princess Kaiulani, had an estate near Waikiki shores, and they revered these stones and treated them with great respect. And the transformation of Waikiki when foreigners started arriving in Hawaii just had an effect on Hawaiian culture that suppressed the language, suppressed representations of Hawaiian identity and culture in really horrible ways. And that's how the stones essentially became lost. They were actually buried under a bowling alley as Waikiki was turned into a tourist mecca. And when that bowling alley was torn down, Hawaiians stepped forward and said, what was once really important to us had been lost, but here it is again. And they started to lift it up again as a story that needed to be seen and heard. Unfortunately, this is at a time when there were so many foreign influences in Hawaii that the way those stories were being told were censored. So certain aspects of those stories were censored. This was a time of great conservatism in the US, militarism, et cetera. So references to what we might see now as transgender people, or mahu as Hawaiians identify them, was suppressed and hidden. So that's the project of this particular endeavor. The idea of animation really was, in working with Hina, to think about how do we bring this back in a way where people can see it as it might have been articulated in the Hawaiian language for hundreds of years, but also to really represent what Hawaii might have looked like and felt like, the aesthetic, the cultural landscapes, the colors, etc. And that's where the work really went into working with our animator, Daniel Sousa, who just has an amazing level and history of experience and working in myth and history, and how to kind of bring those kinds of combinations of story alive together.
I'm curious to know how this film is being seen. Are you able to, I mean, obviously right now, we're not in a position for public screenings, but has there been, I guess, an ability to get this seen more, I guess, more widespread in Hawaii to sort of raise awareness of Mahu and of the site itself?
Well, I'll start. Maybe Hina, you can talk about some of the reactions. Yes, it is starting to be seen quite widely here. It's obviously the virtual festival landscape. I think, while it's been a challenge because most of us really love to be in community with audiences when they're experiencing your work, and that's just an extraordinary opportunity to really feel the reactions of people. The virtual landscape has really allowed us to reach broader audiences in ways we just couldn't have imagined before. And here in Hawaii, we were in the Hawaii International Film Festival, and now there's a lot of other kinds of virtual opportunities. So the kind of reactions that are pouring in from us are just, overwhelming and heartwarming, particularly from younger people, younger viewers and their families, who are saying, it's amazing to see someone like me reflected in my own culture's stories. And heartbreaking at the same time from older viewers who say, if only I had known when I was little that my society, my culture had a place for me, my life could have been very different. But anyway, that's the work of the project, is to make sure that people can now see themselves reflected in their own home.
Well, thank you both so much. I'd like to now discuss Elo with Alexandra Ramirez. And let's start by talking about how this film, it feels almost like a dream. And I'm curious to know how that, that kind of a story exists in a script form. When you were writing the film, what were sort of the, I guess, how did you go about, I think, putting into words what winds up becoming a very visual experience that really doesn't operate with things like dialogue, but obviously with a lot of metaphors presented visually?
Hello, everybody. Actually, this script, it's not a normal script, I think, because I started to write it through images to tell the story. And then I asked help to a Portuguese writer who calls Regina Guimarães. But the type of writing, it was more poetic. It's not something really as a script that it need to be really clear. The things were not really clear. In live action, it's good that the actions are really described and not so big space for doubts in the interpretation to the actors. But actually here we didn't feel the need of doing that. So the Regina, the writer, she made like a really poetic type of uh, of writing. So in this, she her words were really open to the interpretation, and it makes me to create more images. So it was more like a ping pong. She writes some sentences, I made more drawings, she see the drawings and make new almost poems. And then this film started to exist, not in a normal shape, as like it's hard for a lot of people to call that a script, but for us it worked as a script. And that's it, because it wasn't the well the regular way to do the things, but it works for a short film like this that has no dialogues but has a lot of words on it. Even if you don't see on the film, behind the scenes it has a lot of poems. Yeah.
This really has quite a unique, beautiful animation style, and I'm curious if you'll talk a little bit about your process for actually bringing that to life, from drawings to animation. So this was hand drawn. The entire film was hand drawn, and tell us a little bit about what that actual process of animating drawings was for you.
Actually, the animation itself, it was a hand drawn, but not on paper. It was digitally. It was made on TV Paint. So each frame was drawn. But after the animation it's done, we print it out, and then we put it on a light table, and on top of that, the people from the team drawing above, they draw above the animation prints, and then the process of doing that, it wasn't so regular or so easy, because we were me and the team, because I also animate and draw, and the team as well, so it was like a really a group job. um, we we made a line in black, but we need to think that the lines that we were drawing will become white. So we have to use the line as the light instead of the shadow, the opposite that people are used to do it. So if I want to make a highlight, I paint it on black, and afterwards, when it goes to the computer, we inverted the colors, and the things, what it seems shadow becomes light afterwards. Um, and this kind of process is really based on printmaking techniques like a woodcut or lino cut, that when you are drawing, you need to think before the light. You need to think before everything, you need to think in the light. So you start to open the lines as light. And this was what it inspired me. And I really like to do to create these visuals for this film, because I associate like to the old films, like, how can I say, those kind of really old films that has a kind of a glow, and to use to make it visible on drawing, to use this kind of feeling, we use graphite powder. So we put some powder in our hands and put some fingerprints, and it seems like film, the film itself. Even if it's drawing, and that kind of approach to the old cinema, it's something that pleased me to have that feeling, because the idea of have the oniric feeling, the like if you are daydreaming uh, on those old films, was made like a really intense glow. The lights were completely how well, I'm missing a lot of words now. I think it's because here is really more late, but I will keep trying to explain. And so using that powder, I think we can got environment similar to the photography, but in drawing. And I think that it helps us to get some approach to the audience, as it was a photography, but it's not. It's drawing. It's um, and that's it. About the technique, I think there is a lot of more thing that can be said, but I think this is enough.
You really do have some very evocative visual metaphors, and I was particularly struck by the woman's head on the small body going into the body that's hanging on the clothespins from the branch. Can you talk a little bit about some of the process of designing those, some of those, the ideas that we see, you know, sort of as the main focal points of the film?
Yes, I think those metaphors represent a lot of things that are usual in our daily life or in our thoughts. The idea of death, it's something that all of us as human beings think how to deal with that, and how it scares us or not, or depends on cultures. And when I use the dog to make the link between both characters, I'm thinking in a lot of stuff like environment, nature, how nature makes the things work, and but how it also depends in our ability to adapt. For example, the idea of the dog became a flute. It just happens because the man is trying to adapt to the death of the dog. And that idea of adaptation, I think it's the most important thing of the film. And each detail or each metaphor that I try to use in image, it has that in mind. The idea of adaptation, the idea of see on a dark thing, something that it's really tough moment to live as a death of someone, how it make us grow and make us stronger, and how can we make things beautiful from that. And the idea of having the body on the branch, it's to give the continuity of that feeling, you know, that you think about death, but it doesn't mean that it has to be death. It just can be a way that you adapt to the world, that you that because in the end she used the suit to be able to eat the figs, to walk, to see everything, to be in a normal standards, and that's it. Yeah, and actually, for example, the idea of the flute that we have, it came from the film of Herzog, The Cave of the Forgotten Dreams.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there they have like archaeologists, like experimental archaeologists, that is trying to play playing a flute, but the thing didn't work so well. I think the sound was not beautiful at all. But the idea of to try to make music as it is supposed to do in the beginning of everything, and do it from the bones of other living being. You know, it's something that it pleased me a lot, and I think it would fit to make a compliment, to make two characters be a part of each other. Yeah.
Thank you, Alexandra. Let's welcome Elizabeth Tova Bailey, the director of The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. This is adapted from an award-winning nonfiction memoir, and I'd love to know how that memoir first came into your life and what inspired you to want to adapt it.
You are on mute.
Elizabeth, I think you have to unmute.
Sorry. The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating came into my life quite unexpectedly. I was bedridden for a year during a particularly difficult time in a chronic illness, and spending a year in bed at a time, and that's happened number of times, is pretty difficult. You get very isolated. And during a visit, a friend who had come by had gone walking in the forest and looked down, and there was this snail crossing the path. So she picked it up, brought it into my bedroom, and basically left it there. And I was actually really quite annoyed. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't even barely brush my teeth, and I'm suddenly responsible for this forest animal. And so it was totally unexpected, and I was dependent on everybody for everything. And I didn't want to ask anybody to have to like take this snail back to the forest. And after, that evening it came out of its shell and I just started to watch it, and I started to continue to watch it because it was the only thing moving in the room. It was there 24/7. I was in my mid to late 30s. It's a very hard time to be isolated in bed when all of your peers are out and working and raising families, and so here's this little animal, and it's studied about its life just a few feet away from me. So I just got completely fascinated by it. It had habits, and I started to get to know that it, understand it was nocturnal. It had adventures at night and slept during the day, and it really sustained me for a year, having this little animal there that, I had a dog and a cat, and I couldn't even care for them. I was so sick. So I never thought I would do anything about that story. It seemed really personal. I didn't really want to share it. It sounded kind of crazy. The snail had sort of really sustained me. So, but eventually I wrote an essay about it because a friend saw some notes I had written and said, you really should, write an essay. So I did that. At the time I wanted to write fiction, and nonfiction seemed really boring and not as creative. But the story really touched people, and it stuck with me. And it was about 5 years later I started to work on the book, and I didn't even know where the book would go. I wasn't even well enough to really work on a book. It was very overwhelming. But I started to. I never wanted to write nonfiction or a memoir, so I started to research snail science and got completely fascinated. It is just an amazing field, and snails are like superheroes. They can do extraordinary things a human can't do. So a lot of science came into the book, and it's packed with quirky Victorian science about snails. But when the book came out, I realized that people couldn't, even with an entire book about this individual snail that I watched, they still couldn't see what I had seen or how beautiful or graceful this little animal is. So I hired a cinematographer locally and just shot some footage of a snail gliding over a moss to make a book trailer. The book trailer, to my astonishment, got national attention. I think it got nominated for a Book Trailer of the Year award as book trailer as art object, or so, had this really wacky nomination, and that sort of surprised me. And I was also blown away by the beauty of the footage we had captured. So I may be explaining too much, but I ended up writing a grant. I was completely new to filmmaking. I love film, but I had never had any experience making a film. And I did my math wrong. I thought, well, a 2-minute book trailer times 5, I'll have a 10-minute short film. That won't take me more than a few months. Well, it took 8 years. So it really became quite a project. And, it takes a snail a minute to cross the screen. That's how slow they are. And how do you make a plot-packed 15-minute film? And so it was really challenging. We used a snorkel lens when shooting for extreme close-ups. It's really difficult working with an animal on set, no matter what size. A snail can vanish quickly. They like to hide in the dark. It's bad for camera equipment to be in damp, dark locations.
Well,
But
so
you have more questions, or?
yeah, no, I mean, on that note, then how does that evolve? Did you let the animal photography dictate sort of where the documentary would go, or was it certain things that you were trying to capture based on the story that you had told? I mean, tell us a little bit about the relationship between the memoir and the documentary footage, and how those two things maybe informed one another.
Sure. Well, it's not documentary. It's all live action, so it's a recreation. Although a snail
theoretically doesn't know it's on stage.
Exactly. So it really is a very unusual merging of these two forms. Definitely. I mean, I experienced the story, so it is my story. I'm not the actor who plays me. it was very hard. I had a 30,000 word book, and I eventually shaved it down to, I think it was under 600 words. All the science came out, you know, it became visually oriented. It was like creating Swiss cheese with my writing, because I kept pulling things out because the images were carrying parts of the story. That was hard for me. I'm a very detail oriented writer. So to remove a lot of stuff was a challenge, to learn how to do that and to let the image convey emotion and story. That was hard. It was hard to get the juxtaposition of a human life next to this tiny life. So we used a lot of rack shots. It was a collaboration with the cast of Snails. I think we had a cast of 10 because they get tired on the set. And, you know, there's a lot of work. We had to find a specific species. Any one of us could go out and spend days trying to find one of these snails. I had to work with somebody who got really well trained to find them. It had to be the right moisture and temperature outdoors, the right month for him to be able to go into the forest and find a neohelix. I was pretty picky casting the neohelix, which he thought was very funny. So there were things I hoped the snail would do, and some things it did not want to do, or it never did, and some things it just took off and did on its own, which I would not even have written to the script, and were absolutely fantastic. And that was sort of lovely to have this animal driving the story in certain ways that we didn't expect.
Well, what can you give us an example of something that was a real discovery from the snail's behavior that you weren't anticipating?
Sure. Well, you know, the whole reason I watched the snail for a year when I was bedridden was because it was so curious about what was around it. It was suddenly in a new world. It didn't know where anything was or what anything was. Everything smelled different. They only have 3 senses, primarily smell, taste, and touch. And its curiosity is what made me curious. And so on the set, I know the night before production started, I was like, this is crazy. I'm stopping this before I'm in debt and before it doesn't work. And who ever thought about making a film about a snail? I mean, I broke all the film rules. It's slow paced. There's no music. It's all natural sound. But what kept me going into the first production day, and then it was too late to turn around and run, was that I knew that every animal in the world is curious. And I thought putting the snail into a set, it would just take off and explore. And in fact, that's what it did. And so I just knew that curiosity is what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us moving forward in life. And even a snail, even an individual species and an individual within that species still has curiosity. And so that's what I counted on. And that absolutely worked. But there are many complications. It took me 6 years to get the sound of the snail eating different foods. Like the sound of the snail eating a mushroom is distinct from eating a dried flower petal. So that was a very long process. I really wanted that in the soundtrack. And we had to design specialized recording equipment where we recorded the sound of the vibrations through the foodstuff to get the sound, because it's such a tiny sound, you can't record it with normal traditional airborne recording equipment. You lose it because of the hum of the wires for the equipment, but we could record it through the mushroom and through the petals with a different technique.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Let's turn to Purple Boy, directed by Alessandro Sequeira. This is another incredibly beautiful, dreamlike experience to watch. I'm curious if, Alexandra, if you can talk a little bit about your early decisions in terms of the style of animation you were going to employ.
Hello, Alex. Hello, everybody. I think you are hearing, yes. The style of animation, let's say for me was very important since the beginning to tell the story of this child in a quite unconventional way in terms of narrative. So I since the beginning I wanted to explore the metaphors, the symbologies, the transitions from a scene to another, So that was very important. Honestly, even if the film it looks visually quite ambitious for a short film, it was not my aim. My first aim to do this film was not on the visual, but was on the script, on the development. It's where I took more time in the project, and it was around 5 years. Not only writing, I had other works besides of that, but yeah, I spent at least 5 years and changing and writing, rewriting. So it was, I counted, it was around 20 versions of scripts I had. So that was quite long. And then when the production started, I had the chance to have with a great team, with the team in 3 countries, in Portugal, in the studio BAP from Alexandra Ramirez is. We are in the same studio in Portugal. And then with another team in France, and then another team in Belgium. So the funny thing, I'm sliding quite a little bit of the subject, but it's talking about animation too. It was curious because we spent almost all the production working as remote distance. So this experience of lockdown I was having already during the production of PURPLEBOY. So I had the chance to work with good animators, and then it was quite easy to explain them my ideas, how I wanted to work, the visual, the animation, the rhythm. So so yeah, it was quite challenging, let's say.
So tell us a little bit about some of the characters, because the story is obviously an exploration of the main character's gender identity, but you also have you've also chosen to have animals represent the other characters, and I'm curious what the evolution of that process was.
Yeah, so since I want to work to give some kind of fable in this short film, and the idea to have anthropomorphical characters came from many other works I did before, but in the script, in my intention as a filmmaker, first I want to have some kind of distance between this character, between Oscar, that has a human face, and all the other characters. So then I went to the idea to have the wolves, all the father and the wolves that we can see, the child wolves from the woods. It was to have this idea of fellowship, like old men are like wolves, and the mother, like the mother hen, is that mother that is close to the sun and wants to keep very traditional. And so it was, in a simple way, was this idea that I had to use animals.
And of course, the mother does transform into a human woman at that moment of acceptance.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about that, what that meant to you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to explore more the not exactly, it's not a punchline, but to be more clear in the end on the time that she's writing Oscar on his uniform, and to give this human, let's say, to become humanized, or to become like, it was exactly as you said. So I want to give this feeling that, okay, she accepted him, so she became human. So, and that the last thing we see in the shot is that eyes looking to us. That I think it's very strong, quite intimate. The character that look to the audience, to us. So yeah, I hope that I answered your question.
Of course. Talk also about the imagery of the plane flying, and then also in the garden. Where did that come from? How did that, I guess, play into the way that you wanted this child's story to evolve?
Well, first I want to explore this. Even it can sometimes look, even if I'm working more in a direction of binary gender, let's say. So it's a character that fights for the acceptance of its gender, a male gender. So yeah, there is a lot of these elements of the, let's say, the male universe of this aeroplane influenced all these elements, but they are quite influenced by his father. There is a parachutist. And I think I can say that that's the fact that I use the father as a parachutist has a quite personal issue in my life. It's my father, he was military parachutist. So that was one of the most personal things that I used in the film to give more this relation between the father and the boy, this quite emotional relationship. So I think I got a lot of influence from my childhood, and when my father, he was parachutist.
Mm.
And yes, I could say more this idea that to explore the plane in the garden, because it was something that was during all the development concepts of the film that I want to explore. This vision from the father, how he looks to the son and how he educate him, but at the same time to explore this visual of aeroplane in a garden in this format of in the shape of aeroplane. So yeah, I wanted to explore and to explore the dreams and when he's flying the aeroplane.
So we see the acceptance for the mother, but not from the father.
I'm sorry?
We see this moment of acceptance with the mother, but we don't have the same experience with the father. Exactly, yeah. So talk a little bit about that choice.
Well, since the father, he's very, since the beginning, since the prologue of the film, we can see this fighting between the mother and the father, and he's always saying he will be he's a boy, and she says he's a girl. So the fact the moment when we see the flower bleeding, he feels that biologically speaking, it's not a man how he wanted to do. So he gets disappointed. And then when we see all the reaction of Oscar, his anger, then we have that kind of very symbolic scene of the ants. And the father, he doesn't accept at all his identity, and he prefers to go to he prefers to save the patriarchal society. So and express it in this ants and this phallic trees in this woods. So So yes, I wanted to use this this quite conflict and this character that he doesn't accept, and he prefers to defend his traditional ideas, let's say.
Mm. Thank you very much, Alexandre. I'm looking now to see if we have the director of Lost and Crowned, but I'm wondering if I'm missing someone here. Okay, so if anyone out there is from Lost and Crowned, please jump in, but I don't think that they're on today. So let me welcome up Camilla Ketter from CARNE Flesh. And Camilla, this is such an amazing collaboration with these women that are telling stories. Is this personal stories from their own experience, or are these stories that were written that they're then performing?
Hi, Alex. It's their own stories, and we recorded. It was like a chat with the interviewees, and it was nothing planned, or they were not playing any role. They were telling their stories naturally.
Wow. You've used very different ways of representing their stories visually, and I'm curious how the conceptualization of each individual story transferred from obviously a sort of personal recollection into a visual format. Can you talk a little bit about your process of transferring from memoir to visual?
Yeah, it's interesting because CARNE began as the idea of making CARNE began with it was supposed to be 2D digital, and I changed my mind during the interviews when I was hearing their stories, more precisely the first protagonist, Raquel Patricio, when she was telling me her story with her mother. Raquel was fat when she was a child, and her mother was a nutritionist, and there was a lot of limitations in regard to food. And I decided to animate in a dinner plate using real food and maybe some objects. I also came from a stop motion background, so I was more comfortable using those elements. And the challenge was to do the same with the next interviews. We did chronologically. So afterwards, when I talked with Larissa, she was telling about period and menstruation, and how she didn't expect her body to be, and we decided to do it in watercolor animation, trying to represent her story better. Like the watercolor is also uncontrollable in a way. It takes the form that the water wants to take, and we try to have this sensorial association with each of the stages in the film. So we have claymation and 35 millimeters painting on the 35 millimeters film, and also 2D digital. Yes.
Of course, sorry, I had to unmute. I loved the actual use of, I mean, when we think of claymation, we're sort of thinking of figurines, but I love the actual presence of clay in one of the stories. Can you tell us about working with that as a medium? Because it's an unusual, I haven't really seen it used that way before.
Yeah, this segment was animated by Cassandra Hayes. She's an amazing stop motion artist. And we decided to use clay also to relate to Valkyria Rosa's speech. Valkyria, she's telling about her premenopausal phase, how her body was changing, and it's different from puberty. She's more mature. We choose to use a more dense material, and also I think how the clay works with time as well, because it gets dry and you have to use water to keep it alive in a way. And it's similar to her speech as well, when she's talking about being in the premenopause phase. And we had some, for example, Jans McMeyer, the animator, he also used a lot of natural clay, and it was a reference for us.
Talk a little bit about finding the women whose stories you end up telling.
We did a lot of research and investigations to decide about the themes and which women we would interview. So the film started with the association between the women stages of life and the meat cooking points. So from this, I created a structure, 5 segments. As the film was a piece of meat, also we were cutting it. So we start in the rare phase and we go to the well done phase. The rare is the childhood. And I created, and the well done is the old age. So I created some very simple profiles for each one of the chapters. For example, the first one, I told you about Raquel Patricio. It was something like a woman who was fat during her childhood, telling a story about fat phobia. So this was the profile. And then from those, we received some reference from friends who knew some women. Even, for example, the second protagonist, she's my best, she's the best friend of my sister. And I remember her, my sister telling me this story, and during the process, and I thought, I think we should talk to Larissa. And there are also 2 famous personalities in the film. The last one is a famous actress here in Brazil, and we had like a profile for her as well. Someone who was considered a muse of the cinema, and also now is in the old age and doing different things as well. And Helena Inez, she's the protagonist, and she was like a muse in the 70s and 60s here in Brazil, in the Cinema Novo and Cinema Marginal. And also there's a singer, which is Raquel Virginia, and she's really well known here. It was important to have people that are in the media somehow and show that how they're affected by the same patriarchal standards, I guess.
Well, since you have to animate and it is a short, I'm curious about the process of the collaborative process of creating a really tight, small story from each person. Was that the result of interviews you were conducting? Did you ask them to write something of a certain length? What was the process of working with them?
Yeah, this was a challenge because it was, the interviews were like a chat. We interviewed like 1 hour per protagonist. So we had a lot of materials, and we interviewed 6 women and we kept 5 in the end. It was a long process, editing and choosing which stories we want to include in the film. And it was also a collaborative work between me, Ana Julia Carvalheiro, who wrote the script alongside me, and the editor, Samuel Mariani. So it was a teamwork and a challenge, because there were so many good stories.
What was the 6th, and why did you cut it? How was it? So, what other stage of life were you planning to explore?
Yeah, in the fourth stage is the, I guess it's the, before the well done. I don't remember in English. I guess it's the medium well.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's the one she's talking about menopause, premenopause, and we had two women, and they both were great. They had amazing stories, but we choose Valkyria because she, the way she talks is very light, and she's talking about a very heavy topic, about a doctor who wants to remove her uterus, which is something very common, but it's very silenced. People don't talk about it. And the way she talks is very light, and I love her laugh. And I thought, no, we need Valkyria in the film. That's why.
Thank you so much, Camila. Let's welcome up Mariam Mohayer, who is the director of the last film, Granddad Was a Romantic. This is only 4.5 minutes and it packs quite a punch. So let's talk a little bit about deciding to tell this story, because if you know, you can draw from many things in your own life, but this story is obviously allows you to talk a lot about family history. So give us a sense of what, or you know, what sparked your interest in telling this story.
Hi, hello. It started for me with the idea of love stories that we hear from our grandparents or great grandparents through other people, and how how perfect it is. You know, it's and I'm, because of my Iranian background in Iran, we're very spontaneous, we're very expressive. Like I've really heard of people who fell in love just by looking at someone's picture, or you know, traveling all night to meet their loved ones. So there is all this, you know, I love you, I have to be with you right now. And then same story, if you hear it from someone else in the family, it could really change. So that was, I thought there was a really good sense of humor in there. But also, I really like the humanity of it. You know, these are people. It doesn't matter where they're from. And I quite like that as a dual national. I quite like to show people as people. I think it helps us communicate and connect better and more, and it's very, very much needed. My granddad is in there, definitely. But what I did is I mixed a few characters together. So other people that I knew or heard about, I thought, okay, oh, that characteristic of that one could match well with this one. What if I add a bit of that to this? So it's a mix and match, but it was quite a challenge to make it work as a mix.
How did your family feel about it?
A lot of them haven't seen it yet,
really?
To be honest with you. Yeah, because they're in Iran, and it hasn't really been online. And I haven't been back since the film was made. But my parents have seen it. They laughed.
Would tell us a little bit about your style and your animation style, and what process you chose. Is this what kind of animation are we watching?
It's a mix. I have a painting background, and I really feel strongly about it. I like that whole handmade feeling to be present in my films. And I animated all of it myself. So it's a mix. There's hand drawn on paper, but also it's 2D digital. Alessandro mentioned TV Paint. I use TV Paint as well. And also I looked into some old Persian manuscripts, and I would like take tiny little details and use it like collage, make it into a pattern in a film. So it's quite a mix, but 2D.
What was the most complicated thing for you to animate that way?
The turn, the sport, you know, the exercise thing that the Grandad does. It's an actual sport, Surhane. And I watched hours of its films. You know, it's one of those things that I hadn't looked at it with this much focus before, and it's actually quite beautiful. It's supposed to be this macho, manly sports, but when you look at it, it's very much a dance. It's actually really it's beautiful, I thought. And then, yeah, to make up, you know, how to, first I had to work out how they do it. And then when you work out, okay, that's how, you know, they go on the toe and then jump and then turn. And then, okay, now how do we animate this? So that was probably the most challenging part.
Knowing that you're going to be doing a lot of this, you know, this very painstaking process of animating, I'm curious to know if the writing a script was actually a process of taking away, because I'm sure that there's so much that you could have included, but you know that every moment in your script is going to have to become hours and hours and hours working on the animation.
No, I never think that. Anything that the story has to work, the film has to work. You cannot. It's like censoring yourself. So never, no. If it's necessary, it has to be there. If it's, you know, no compromise.
And so what, I guess this is more a question really for anyone that's working in animation, but specifically, where does this film now go? Because, you know, we're lucky to be able to share it with our audience in this way, but, you know, animation is such a wonderful art form. Shorts allow us to really see such a wide variety. But I mean, how do animators really get their work seen in this format, since it's obviously not, you know, a feature film that's going to travel around movie theaters?
I think my favorite experience with it is festivals, and to watch it in festivals. I think a lot of people here agree with me. To share it with the audience live is probably the best experience for me. And with Grandad was a romantic. It's a comedy, and I think that probably one of the biggest moments of the film is the ending. And when I get that, when you hear the laughter, it's uncomparable to anything else, really.
It's wonderful that is like the last moment of the showcase, is that the final line from your film, because it really would have been a great moment to enjoy with a lot of people live. So I hope that experience continues to translate, even though we're all watching it virtually.
Yeah, me too. I had a good fair share of it, you know, before COVID, in quite a few festivals. But yeah, you never tire of it.
Joe, please, if you wanted to jump in about.
Oh yeah, sure. And I just want to give apologies for Hina. She had a speaking engagement, so had to step off a little bit early. Just regarding kind of animation and, you know, who and how it reaches people, we're really fortunate that this film is supported by Pacific Islanders and Communications, which is an important funder of films for PBS that incorporate Pacific Islander content. So the film is the basis for a documentary that's in production now, that's exploring the history that's raised in the animation and all the questions that come up about what happened to this important story. We're also really lucky that it was noticed by the Bishop Museum here, which is the the museum of record for Pacific Islander history, culture, science, etc. And they asked if they could frame an exhibition based on the animation that will explore all these themes in much deeper ways. So we've been designing now for a year that exhibition, which will launch here in Honolulu in summer of 2022, which is when we hope people are back in museums and galleries everywhere. So that's a really exciting opportunity for us. And Daniel, the amazing artist, Daniel Sousa, his imagery, his aesthetic, which is really what has inspired, us and audiences everywhere, is now going to be, I think, a major element of how we bring all of these different aspects of Hawaiian history to life in the museum context.
That's great. I am going to put us all on gallery view now for a second. And just to wrap up, I have a question that came to me via email. And anyone that wants to jump in and answer is welcome to. So the question is, I'm sure there are plenty of projects you have in development, or at least in ideation stage. How did you decide to progress these particular shorts? And when or how did you know they were the right one, or they were the ones to be worth the trial and error and constant adding of resources? Was it based on resources already available, the personal nature of the project, the highest quality of collaborators available, etc.? Yes, Mariam.
For me, it's a very creative process. If it is my subject at the time, I do it. If I don't feel connected to it, if it's aged for me, if my heart's not with it anymore, it wouldn't work. So it's very important that it's coming from the heart, that I'm connected to the subject.
Yeah, I agree with you, Marian. Actually, because animation takes so much time that if we spend 2 years doing something that we don't truly believe, it's really hard to keep doing until the end in a healthy way. So I think sometimes we need to think about production, like if it's affordable, if we have team, if we don't have, but if we have connection to the project, we will manage. I think at least it's a way of seeing this. And I'm sorry, today I'm a bit tired because I don't tell you, but I'm pregnant.
Congratulations!
Yeah, so I went to lie down a bit because I was really sorry. But next time I promise I will be more fresh than today. But well, I just want to say this because I might seem a bit away, and this is the reason why my next project I need to get the strength to do it.
It'd be quicker than the animation.
What?
This project will be quicker than the animation.
Oh yeah, it was already faster than any animation that I've done. Yeah.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
I can jump in and say that my film is all nonprofit funded, and I wanted to create the film because I wanted it to reach the medical community, the medical humanities world, to explore the importance of patient environment for people who have illnesses or injuries and are somehow isolated from that. And it resonates incredibly well with the pandemic right now, with the topics of illness and isolation. But I also wanted to celebrate the life of a snail and show that any one species on Earth has extraordinary abilities that no other species has, and to show that you can have an individual character within any species as well. So the film is all funded by Arts Commission, Humanities Councils, private foundations for environmental reasons, for medical humanity reasons, and just for the film arts reason, because it was pretty innovative in some ways within the film world as well. So I guess I like projects that seem impossible, although I think I'm ready at this point in my life to have one that isn't. But that's why I took it on. If I had any idea it would have been 8 years, I would have run so fast in the other way, in the other direction, that it would never have happened. But I am now at the end of that process, and glad that it that it and I survived, and so I'm very happy it'll go out into the world. And I hope it will be used in part, at least, to fundraise within the environmental field and within the medical field as well. But it also has a very general audience of all ages, from about 2 years old to people in hospice. So it's really fun seeing people's reactions. People sometimes react primarily to the snail, sometimes to the human condition of lost health. So people react really uniquely depending on their own history and what draws them into the film. And my goal was to create a film that was kind of haiku-like, which I think the Russian filmmaker, famous Russian filmmaker, blanking on his name, it's terrible, but he thought of film as haiku. And that was sort of one of my goals as I worked on the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, 8 years of production, I think it's enough for me. One project in 8 years, I don't want to do something, I hope. So I'm working and developing at this moment a new short film. It will be around 7 minutes, I think, I hope, at least not more than 7 minutes. But it's really very interesting. It's quite paradoxical, how I deal with the creative process, because it can be fascinating, but sometimes frustrating because it's always changing. Well, at least for me, the development process of script writer, I change it a lot. So it can be sometimes some empathy periods, but sometimes when I feel some kind of light coming and some new ideas, it's really amazing, fascinating. So yeah, but I hope that in 3 years we'll be here talking about the new film.
Best wishes for that. Does anyone else want to jump in? Then thank you all so much for spending all of this time with us today. I know we're tapping into so many different time zones, and I'm sorry that we didn't have the opportunity to involve our students in a more direct, interactive way, but I'm sure that they'll have appreciated the inspiration and the creativity that they've managed to take away from all of your films. Best wishes, of course, for the Oscars. That is certainly a very exciting time, and I look forward to seeing how things move forward with the shortlists and the nominations. So thank you all so much again, and I hope to see you all again.
Thank you.
Me too.
Good to see everyone.
Yeah, here you again.
Luck with new projects. Film.
Yeah, the film.
Aloha, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.